Alright, so we're ready to start the actual programming for our dynamic functionality, and the first thing we need to do is create a database. Alright, so right now I'm at basically the home page of our app, which has nothing in it yet. Remember, all we have for our application is our file structure. Alright, in the past few videos we created the layout, all the HTML and CSS files, and we'll also be integrating that with our application. So I'm going to go to localhost/phpMyAdmin. Alright, and basically, let me just log in real quick. Okay, so we're going to create a new database, and I'm just going to call it Talking Space. Okay, and click on that, and we're going to create our first table will be the users table. Alright, this is going to have 10 fields. Alright, so we're going to have an ID, we'll have a name, an email, an avatar, username and password. Passwords, we're going to use MD5 encryption. You never want to store an actual text password in a database. You want to use some kind of encryption. MD5 is a little weak, but it's fine for this project. You might want to use SHA-1 or something even stronger with a hash or something like that. But we're just going to use MD5 for now. Going to have a little about field. I think that's it. No, we need last activity and join date. I'm sorry, we needed 9, not 10, but that's fine. You can just leave that one blank. Now we want to set the types. Okay, the ID here is going to be an integer, and it's going to be our primary key, so we want to change index to primary. We want to click AI for auto increment. Name will be varchar, and let's say 100. Email, same thing, we'll say 100 as well. Avatar, same thing. Avatar is just going to be basically the image name. We're going to store the image in the images folder, and then just point to whatever the name is in the database. Username, let's make the max 10. Password is going to be varchar. I'm going to put 64 for this, even though I think MD5 is 32, but just to be safe. About is going to be a text block with no limit. Last activity is going to be a date time. Alright, and then join date will be a timestamp. Alright, now we want default values for these, and the only one that's going to get a default value is join date. Alright, so we're going to set this here to current timestamp. What that'll do is whenever we enter a user into the database, this field will be stamped with the current time. Alright, so that makes sense. When they join, when it gets added into the database, that's the date they joined. Alright, so that's good. Let's go ahead and click save. Alright, so that's it for our users table. The next table I want to do is let's do categories. Okay, so each topic can have a category, and this is only going to have 3, I think. Alright, so ID, same thing. This is going to be primary key and auto increment. And then the next one will be the name, which will be a varchar, and that'll be 100. And we also want a description. Okay, description, let's make that varchar, and we'll give it a limit of 400. And I think that should be good. Let's do that. Alright, so now we want a topics table. And let's do 8 columns. ID, which will be primary key, and auto increment. And then we'll have a category ID, and that's basically going to be a foreign key to the categories table, so that'll be an integer. Alright, next, actually I'm going to put 11 for the limit for these integers. That's what I usually put. And then we're going to have a user ID, which will basically be a foreign key for the users table. Next we want title, and that'll be varchar 100, and body, which will be text. Okay, after body, let's do last activity, and then create date. Okay, and that's going to be a current timestamp, so we want to choose that, and that should be good. Actually, last activity will be date time. Whoops, I changed the wrong one. That should be timestamp, and this should be date time. Alright, so one more table here, and that's going to be replies, and let's do 5 columns. ID, okay, and a reply is going to have a topic ID, a user ID, a body, and a create date. Okay, this is going to be 11 body. Create date is going to be the timestamp, current timestamp. Alright, so that's our entire database. So what I want to do now in this video is I want to create our database class, and we're going to be using PDO, PHP Data Objects, and it's basically the best practice for connecting to a MySQL database using PHP. It's much safer. You can use prepared statements, which obviously adds a lot of security. Prevents SQL injections, things like that. And the class that I kind of adopted for this project is actually from a blog post. Okay, and it's from cultwith3ts.com, and it's basically a programming blog, and it's a PDO PHP class, and he kind of goes through an explanation of everything. I did change a few things. But this is basically what I used as, I guess, as a template. Alright, so what I'm going to do is go to our application, and inside of libraries, I want to open up database.php. Alright, I'm just going to paste this in. Alright, so it's not too big, especially compared to most database classes, but basically we're defining a class called database. Alright, obviously we're using object-oriented programming. We're setting a bunch of variables up here. Okay, so we have, and they're all private, so they can only be accessed in this class. Alright, we have host, user, password, and DB name, and you can see that these are equal to a constant, which we need to set, and we're going to set that in the config file, but we'll do that right after we're done with this. So after that, after our credentials, we have a DBH, which is basically a handler, so we can interact with the database. We have an error variable if we want to output errors, and then we have our statement, which we can use for prepared statements. Alright, so the first function is a constructor. When using PHP, you want to create a constructor, you want to use this double underscore and then construct. Alright, and whatever is in here is going to be called whenever you create a new database object. Just by creating it, this will run. Alright, so the first thing it does is selects a DSN. So we're using MySQL, but you can actually use quite a few different databases with PDO. So we want to set that, and then we're setting our database name equal to this DB name, and that pertains up here to this. Okay, so whenever you want to reference any of these variables, you want to use this along with this arrow, alright, which is a hyphen and a greater than sign. Alright, so you probably know this if you have any experience with object-based programming. Alright, so the next thing we're doing is just creating an array of options, and we're going to set a couple different options here. One is to be persistent. Okay, so we just want to have a persistent connection, so we can create just one object, and that we can actually have multiple interactions with it. And then we're just setting the error mode to exceptions. And there's a ton of different options you can use with PDO. I'd suggest going to php.net and taking a look at those. Then down here, we're just creating a try catch block. Alright, so it's going to try this code. If it fails, it's basically going to give us an error message. Alright, and the code is just a connect string, really. We're creating a new PDO object, and then we're just passing in our credentials. Alright, so this is coming from up here, user, pass, and then options is our PDO options array. Let's see, and next we have our query function, which is going to create the statement for us. So we'll pass in a query from wherever we're working from, select all from topics or something like that, and we can create a statement with that, and then we're going to bind values to it. Alright, so if we want to say select topic where ID equals 1, you're going to use this bind method to say, well, I want the ID that equals 1. Alright, and that'll prevent SQL injections. Alright, and all we're doing here is checking the type of input and just putting some sanitation or validation on it. Alright, so we have integer, boolean, null, and string. And that's just going to bind the value down here. And then these here, execute, is just going to basically execute whatever your statement is. Result set, that's what's going to be used to grab onto the result object. Alright, and we specified here fetch object. You can also fetch an array and work with an associative array. I prefer to work with objects though. And then this is basically the same thing, except it's going to be just one result. So if we want the topic with the ID of 1, that's obviously going to be just one returned row, so we could use single. If we're saying select all from topics without any specification, we could get a bunch of results, so we'll use result set. Alright, row count basically is just going to return the amount of rows returned, and then last insert ID will just give you the ID of whatever the last ID you inserted was. And then down here is just some transactions. We're not going to really get into that. Transactions, I actually didn't really need to put those in, but I just figured I would. So that's pretty much it for our database class. It's really simple, but it's also reliable and relatively secure. So the last thing I want to do here is, let's make sure we save this, and the last thing I want to do is go into the config file, and I'm actually going to open my application down here so I don't have to keep going out of the editor. Alright, so I want to go to XAMPP, htdocs. Alright, so I'm going to go to config, and I'm just going to paste in a block of code here. Alright, so really simple. We're just defining a couple constants. Alright, we have our host, our user, and this should all be your database credentials. And then our database name. Alright, so that's that, and that's where our database class is pulling the info from. Alright, and then here I just defined a site title. You can put what you want here. And then here I defined a path for our base URI. Alright, so we don't have to say http/ whatever, localhost / it'll just automatically give us that URI. Alright, so save that. In the next video, we will be creating our template class and get into setting up views and templates and other display options.